Story of Patrick and the Spriggan. Now, when I'm telling tales, I don't always remember what they are. I have to write them down first. And I'm going to read this one and then make up the ending as I go along. And we'll see what happens. The four children persuaded everyone to let them camp together. But lines were drawn at where. No, they were not to camp on the dunes or the cliffs or in the woods. The garden would be better. After much discussion, which almost meant no camp at all, it was agreed that they could camp in Pandora's field. Now, Pandora was an old lady who lived nearby in a crumbly Cornish cottage with a soggy, saggy cement roof. Her house always provided fascination, and it had a disused water wheel at the side, an ivy that grew across the walls, and a very small front door. And it had various buildings of one sort or another. Pandora used to keep her horse in the field, but it had been empty of livestock ever since her fall, and she decided that horses were not for her. So the four children arrived on a Friday evening after school with their tent, and Pandora suggested that they stay away from the granite horse trough at the bottom of the field. And they should stay away from the granite sheds because those could be dangerous. So they pitched their tent in what they thought was the best place, laid a mat out for tea, and unpacked what they'd got in their carrier bag. Mum had provided them with pasties that night and cake. Now, while Patrick wanted to eat his pasty straight away, the others wanted to save theirs for later because they felt that they were having a midnight feast. Patrick didn't agree. Patrick was very hungry. So after they'd pitched the tent, Patrick stomped off down the field, having snatched his pasty, and sat on the very edge of the granite horse trough that Pandora had suggested they stay away from. Well, this is the bit where I start to make it up. And I'll read bits and make up the other bits. Patrick sat on the crumbly wall at the end of the field, munching his pasty, and was sure he heard a rustling noise behind him. But each time he turned round, he could see nothing. And at the last mouthful of pasty, he heard a loud sigh and a moan, and a voice said, "You ate the last mouthful. You ain't left nothing for Spriggan. Spriggan make you pay." Pat turned round to see that there was a pixie about the height of his knee, waving his fist. "Sorry, I didn't see you there. You should have called to me earlier." "Are you all right?" said Patrick. "No, I'm not. You ate the last bit of pasty," said the Spriggan. "And besides, I'm stuck. I got my foot on this boulder." Well, Patrick hopped over the wall, moved the boulder, and the little Spriggan moved his foot. "That doesn't give you anything," he said. "You didn't save your pasty for me, and everybody knows that you should save pasty for a Spriggan." Now, Spriggans are little fairy people. I'm going to put some pictures up around where the video is so that you can have a look. And there's lots on the internet that you can actually find if you look them up. But they tend to be quite bony. Tend to be very, very thin legs with big knobbly knees and long hands and extraordinarily long feet and pointy ears. And they wear the most interesting clothes made out of all sorts of stuff. But usually they're very helpful. And they can be very useful. And farmers used to leave bowls of milk or sacks of potatoes around so that the Spriggans would have something, and then they would help the farmer look after the farm and look after the land. But this particular Spriggan, probably because he'd had a boulder dropped on his foot and he couldn't actually move, was really rather teasy. Patrick said to him, "Has I helped you? Is that all right now? I suppose you want them wishes now." "What? Wishes? Do you grant wishes?" "Well, I could do something for you." "What could you do for me?" said Patrick. "Well, you could have something like things you touch turn into what you want." "Oh, that sounds good. Things I touch turn into something different." "Yes," said the Spriggan. "It's yours." And with that, the Spriggan disappeared. Patrick thought, well, that's interesting. Tentatively, he poked a stick, which turned into a snake and wriggled away. "This is going to be fun," he said. Climbed back over the wall, made sure his pasty bag was tucked into his pocket, which suddenly turned into a hamster. Pulled it out, let it go in the field, and went back to where the tent was. He didn't know quite how he was going to explain what had happened and what he was going to see to the others. Anyway, as he came up the field, Ellie came out of the tent. She was looking at her new phone and sending a message to Mum. Patrick reached out a finger, touched the phone. The phone turned into a small bird and flew away. "Patrick, what have you done to my phone?" Patrick was in stitches. He thought it was hysterical. Then Jonah came out. He touched Jonah. Jonah turned into a banana and just lay around on the floor. He thought that was even funnier. And so did Jonah's little brother Albie, who thought it was also hysterical. In fact, he thought it was so funny that he reached out his hand to shake Patrick. Patrick reached out his hand and shook Albie's hand, and Albie turned into a small mouse and scurried away into the corner of the tent. Ellie said, "What have you done?" Patrick explained about the Spriggan and about what the Spriggan had granted him. Oh, she said, "You'd better take your cake and go and see the Spriggan." Patrick took out the rather large jam donut that really he'd been looking forward to eating rather a lot, and took it down the field and called for the Spriggan. "Spriggan, Spriggan, I need things to turn back to the way they were." The Spriggan appeared. He said, "What have you got for me?" "I've got some jam donut." "Do you just want the last bit?" "No, I want the donut," he said. Patrick looked at the donut. He looked at the icing on the outside. He thought of the jam in the middle, and his tummy rumbled. And he thought, "Oh dear." But he put the donut down, and the Spriggan came, picked it up, and began to munch his way through it. Pretty soon Patrick found that he had a bag in his pocket that was his pasty bag. And when he returned to the camp, he discovered that things were back to normal, that Ellie had her phone, and that the two boys were the same. No longer a banana, and no longer a scurrying mouse. And for the rest of the camp, Patrick made sure that a little bit of food was always taken down to the miner, to the Spriggan. Now, maybe we should all share a bit of what we have, just to make life fair and to make sure those people who haven't got stuff have got some.